All right, speaking of growth, speaking of the world, let's bring on Buzzfeed.
Yeah.
Millie Tran is here from Buzzfeed. Come on up. So, not to put too fine a point on it, but you're kind of in charge of the world at Buzzfeed, right?
I'm not. My boss would not appreciate that. I am in charge of making the best of BuzzFeed available to the world. So that means deciding what that thing is and then making it available in different languages, on different platforms, in different formats. So the reason why my title isn't global translation is because there's so much more to sharing a piece of reporting or a photo that goes beyond just translating words. You adapt the words, that's translating. You adapt the culture, you adapt the humor. Sarcasm is notoriously hard. So yeah, it's adapting like every factor of a piece of content, basically.
And how many countries and how many languages are you native in now?
So I work with all of our non-English editions. So that's Brazil, Mexico, Spain, France, Germany, and Japan.
Wow.
Go ahead.
No, one of the things that I wonder about how BuzzFeed's success, if you had to think of 2 or 3 things that make it so successful and so international, what are they?
It would probably be, so I wouldn't be able to do my job if we didn't already set up these really strong local offices. The reason why we're not just purely translating is because we wouldn't know the markets, we wouldn't know the audience. So much of what I do depends on our local editors knowing their audiences, knowing what works there, and being able to make smart decisions and do smart experiments, basically. So I would say a really strong local presence. We have really great editors in all those editions I just mentioned. And I think the next thing would be a really strong tech and editorial background. A lot of what we do is fueled by data. It's not just saying like, I think cheese works everywhere. It's testing that empirically and using data to supplement all of our findings, because otherwise you would just kind of fall into like geopolitical and like cultural stereotypes, which sometimes are true. So I think that like really great marriage between a like great data tech team to build the tools for us to use. And then I think the last thing would be like valuing lessons over failings. So we throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall or whatever food you want to mention. And
Watermelon.
I know, watermelon, I guess. Like, yeah, I missed the big one. So it's that culture of experimentation, because we haven't figured out every market yet. So that willingness to try and get something completely wrong. Like, for example, a really recent example is the Stanford letter that our reporter, Katie Baker, got. We have never done a translation that long. I think it was like 7,200 words. And we translated it into French, Portuguese, Spanish, with German and Japanese forthcoming. And it blew up in France. And we weren't expecting that. We thought maybe other outlets had translated or summarized it or whatever. And we had done it fast enough. Our editor in France was like perceptive enough to know her audience would really catch on to this. And in Brazil and Germany, the issue of sexual harassment has been in the news for the past 6 months or so. So it was a really great timing, and it was just taking that risk of translating this very long, sensitive, and really strong piece. But it's hard because it's really long.
So what are some of the lessons you've learned about what crosses borders and what doesn't cross borders, and trends, memes, interests, and such?
So it's hard because, you know, when I started this role in November, I struggled to kind of find some organization, some media company kind of doing similar things. I found that a lot of media organizations do translate stuff, kind of not as dynamically. Some organizations do translate things, but maybe not as like bottom up. It was like Discover saying this show would be good here, and like we're going to produce it all. And also, they have like an amazing translation apparatus. They translate into like 40 plus languages, of which I don't know that I can name like 40 languages. But so I struggled to find kind of like a similar counterpart. And it's funny, I didn't expect it to find it in IKEA. IKEA is really interesting. Their global growth has been focused on kind of finding the overlap of cultures. One of the lessons they learned, I'm like stealing IKEA's lessons from my lesson. But one of their big lessons was when they were launching in Korea, not to try to make IKEA in Korea, but to find like the best of IKEA and make it Korean, if that makes sense. There's like a really subtle difference, and it's about finding that overlap of what IKEA does well and bring it to a Korean audience. So that like really shaped my thinking about how we should approach kind of our discovery of what works where. It's about finding that overlap. It's not like we know that this thing works here. It's we made this thing, and where else can it work?
She's at Millie, Millie, on
You're at Sri.
At Sri. So we're in the First Name Club on Twitter. Please follow her. She is in her title. You were saying it's not global translation, global adaptation, and I think that's fascinating. I also want to give a shout out to one of your colleagues, Anup Kafle, who many of you know.
He translated his Nepali story, and that was the first time. And sorry to interrupt you. This goes back to kind of our marriage of tech and editorial. I was like, hey, does our CMS support Nepali? And of course, our product lead was like, our CMS supports almost every language. So I was like, thank you. I will proceed.
He's from Nepal, and he's the deputy foreign editor, lives in London. ANUP Kaphle, Anup Kafle. Follow him. So he does very serious stories, but he also cooks goat all the time and posts online, and just and you folks do a lot of food stuff, as we were saying.
Yes.
So I'm curious what's the flow from America/English into the other countries and languages versus the reverse flow?
So that, I feel like that's the assumption that we work with, right? That we're taking all English content and importing it.
Right.
We're not, because that would be like cultural imperialism. And the great thing we found is that because of those strong local offices, they're creating really great content, which means because our English audience is our largest like language audience, we actually like make all their stuff go viral. So we have someone on our team who kind of focuses on bringing good non-English content back into English, and he's just really great because he knows Buzzfeed so well that he can recognize that voice even through like really horrendous Google translations.
What's fascinating to me too is I think we see an internationalization trend that's different now. Is that you see Netflix? I watch The Heavy Water War on Amazon.
Yeah.
I'm watching Borgen, which I think is pronounced something like Boyen, from Denmark.
Like an umlaut in there.
On Amazon, on Play. There's a reverse flow of American entertainment imperialism now, which is really healthy and really good. That you see Netflix, I think they've said that they plan to produce shows.
Yeah, like Narcos is an example
Exactly.
of that. Right.
Elsewhere to give them worldwide presence, but it's not an American-produced show.
Yeah.
And so you follow that, I think, in terms of trying to create bridges across cultures.
Yep, that's my job. It's literally just connecting all the great things we have and making it something.
So I want to give a shout out to a show called Lilyhammer. If you haven't seen it, it's Steve Van Zandt. It's a Scandinavian production. If you think of Silvio from The Sopranos, goes into witness protection in Lilyhammer. It's actually Lillehammer, but he remembers the Olympics and he mispronounces it as Lilyhammer. It is a fantastic program, but it's not American. It happens to have an American actor in it. There are people all over the world watching right now and archived on Facebook Live. Can you explain how people who want to work for you, with you, what skills they need, and what's the process by which whenever you post a job, they can learn about it?
So BuzzFeed.com/jobs. There's so many jobs on there. And now you can sort by like which office like around the world. So that's really cool. I'm actually like knee deep into hiring right now, and it turns out hiring in 3 countries in 3 different languages is very hard.
What are the countries?
We just hired someone in France actually, but we're currently hiring Brazil and Germany for my team. So if you speak Portuguese or German.
So what do you look for?
So we look for obviously some sort of translation background. It doesn't necessarily have to be professional. One of my team members in Tokyo kind of talked me through this, and you know, she was never a formal professional translator, but her English is good enough and her Japanese is obviously good enough. So obviously some like advanced grasp of each language, in our case like English and whatever other language. And then editorial judgment, it's so much about like being obsessed with the audience, and not just your audience, but like the media within that country, because something that we can do is like, if, you know, if the culture or if the media industry in Spain doesn't do a lot of X content, but the US does, maybe we can try that there and like in a low risk way, and that's our competitive advantage. So it's not just knowing about like each individual post per se, or video, or cartoon, or whatever, but it's knowing about the context in which you're providing that to the audience.
So I still want to know, are cats the universal language?
I think there are different animal preferences, but I'm not sure. There are different food preferences, though,
Okay, so talk
that's
about
fun. So one of the fun things I learned was that like the word bacon is very, like there are different ways to say it across different Spanishes, and they're like very particular. Like Latin America says bacon, I don't even remember, a different way than like the Spanish, like in Spain say bacon. And we once translated a food video where we had used Spanish as like, I forgot which bacon we used, but the whole comment section was like, but why did you spell bacon this way? And it's so funny because you learn those things, and I have someone on my team who's literally reading Buzzfeed all day and like learning this. I actually described her as like, she's like machine learning, but as a human. So that's the world we live in. Another example was, we had posted this, it's another food example, because everyone eats, universal, finding that overlap. So our French team posted this video, and this was like in February, about, you know, some like fresh tomato recipe. And I think the comment she wrote was like a really great recipe for your Wednesday or something. I don't know, something like that. And the whole comment section there was like, where do you get fresh tomatoes in the dead of winter? And I was like, oh, that's so French. So, you know, it's about learning all these things without kind of couching yourself in stereotypes, but then like laughing when they come true.
Especially in America,
Yeah.
as an American.
Yeah.
I speak 1.1 languages. Yeah. I didn't go abroad till I was 24. We're just too cloistered here.
Yeah.
And it really helps, I think, that the internet, above all else, connects us around the world.
Yeah, my job wouldn't exist maybe like,
exactly.
I mean, it didn't exist a year ago. It didn't exist till November. So.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
At Millie, follow